This is Metro Week, our top story, education funding in Arizona. We'll delve into the governor's plans for career and technical education programs. Then our Journalists Roundtable analyzes the week's news.
Welcome to Metro Week. I'm Andrea Kelly. This week we'll focus on education spending, specifically the proposals the governor released in his budget plan. Here's what he's asking the legislature to do when it passes a budget for the fiscal year that begins in July. The governor wants an increase of more than $100 million for K-12 education, but it won't all go to classrooms. He's specifically funding repairs for aging buildings and inflation spending. The additional funding also does not include the money voters will decide on in a May special election. The university spending situation is improving. The three institutions will get a boost in this year's budget and another $14 million next year, according to the governor's proposal. That's following a cut of about $100 million for this fiscal year. One of the program's hardest hit in recent years, proportionally, is the Career and Technical Education Program, known as JTED. When lawmakers passed this year's budget, they planned a $30 million cut for JTED next year. The governor's budget proposal includes $30 million for JTED, but it's not a straight replacement of operating funds. Instead, the new $30 million will be spread over 3 years and will be a grant program that requires matching funds from employers. It's that JTED funding we're going to explore now. I asked the superintendent of the Pima County JTED, Alan Storm, to join us, along with Frank Westerbeek, who owns a Tucson business that works closely with JTED graduates. Dr. Storm, could you please explain your understanding of the governor's grant program proposal as it stands today?
The governor's grant proposal is that there would be a $10 million allocation each year for 3 years, and any school district would be able to apply for funding under that. The problem that I see with that is that it requires a business match. So if I were writing a proposal for $200,000, I would have to have some kind of a match from a business or industry organization. And that's pretty difficult to ask businesses to do when they're struggling in the economy that we have. In addition to the fact that at the end of 3 years, that funding would have to be self-sustaining. There would be no more money coming from the grant from the governor.
And so because all of the JTED funding that's proposed is this grant, there's no operating funds or not enough to meet the demand.
No, there's the current budget as it is stands to remove $30 million from the JTEDs around the state. Without that $30 million, we won't be around to apply for those funds because we will lose our funding.
There's an effort underway at the state legislature to either try to reverse this or change it as the lawmakers work on crafting the state budget. Again, this is the proposal from the governor. It's not a final decision. Are you involved in that effort?
Very much so. All of the JTEDs are. And I think it's a pretty good proposal to do, but that would really need to be on top of the $30 million funding that they propose to take away.
And so is that what you're proposing or asking for the legislature to change it to?
I'm asking the legislature not to cut the $30 million that is proposed on July 1.
All right, and Mr. Westerbeek, you own a local business in town, and I'd like you to tell a little bit about your experience hiring students who've graduated from the JTED program.
Well, the JTED program has been wonderful, both personally and professionally. The students that we're getting, we have 9 graduates of JTED that work at Gadabout as cosmetologists. And the beauty of it is they're passionate about what they do. They have an alternate way to learn, but they've absolutely made a commitment through high school and then after high school programs to be able to get their cosmetology degree and then come right to us. And then we just further their career with our intern program. As I see it, and we've talked, Alan and I have talked many times, and we saw the aha here to help build this community from the ground up and really put some energy in with the JTED students and help them really grow what they needed to learn to be the best. The 9 students that I'm talking about in our company are not just average people. They are above average employees for our company. They're passionate about what they do. So for us, it was easy to see an alliance and to understand the JTED program for every business that they support.
Now, the students are in high school, but they're also choosing this alternative education path that gives them career or technical education on top of their high school degree, right? That's how it works?
That's correct.
Okay. So you're getting students who've completed high school and completed a cosmetology program before they apply for a job.
Yes, which is tremendous, financially to them, because the state is assisted in this. So it helps them start with a clean slate, that they're not burdened with student loans perhaps or government grants. This is there for them so they can free their mind up to really participate in their academic aspect, and the intern program that we have is very hands-on. So they need that step up, as you may.
And they're finishing high school at 17, 18, 19 years old. They have a state license and they're taxpayers. It's good for the economy. It's good for building the business.
And your daughter even went through the program.
Yeah, my daughter has been passionate about being a hairdresser. We have had our family business for 37 years in Tucson. And she absolutely wanted to go through the JTED program as soon as she heard about it, because it was a newer program. She got her grandmother involved, the founder of our company, and they went right down to school and signed her up. And with her passion, but with the program, that's the key. And it's really the synchronicity and the unity between the two that make this thing work so well. She is absolutely setting the world on fire. She loves her life. She owns her own home. She drives her own car. She is proud of what she does. And so much of that started with JTED, and then the opportunity going to a company, any business, to have that step up was such a huge event for her.
Now let's broaden it out into kind of a more public perspective there. What would it mean? What do you think of the governor's proposed grant program as a business owner who would be asked to make those matching funds?
You know, to make the matching funds, it would be impossible for us to do that, because when people come to us for our training, we're already made a commitment to pay them an hourly wage while they're still learning and enhancing their skills. So to add that on top of it, and we were in talks of building a stronger bond and what could we do to help. And because of the governor's decision to pull back the money, we had to stop the conversation. Now we're doing it just because we care. And it's fun to watch, and sometimes you just put it out there, and we hope that things will change and get better for the community and JTED.
Dr. Storm, have you heard from other business owners in the Tucson area?
We have tremendous business support. I think the biggest thing we have going for us with the legislature to try to convince them not to cut the $30 million is the support from the Southern Arizona Leadership Group, the Greater Phoenix Leadership Group. They're all really supportive. They understand what the economy is like. They understand what it's like to have taxpayers. They know what it's like to build people into from education into a business, and they have been extremely supportive at the legislature. So I think I'm hopeful that the legislature will turn around the decision that they made last year. And I just want to also say that the relationship that we have with Frank and with Salon, with the spas, is that it's an in-kind relationship. I mean, we're not asking them for money. We don't exchange money in any way. We have a working relationship that is good for us. We send our students to them for additional training. They really support us. They help us with products. They help us design changes that we need in our spas and those in our training programs, those kinds of things. I think it's a really good relationship, but we're not asking them to contribute money to us.
Now, you mentioned that if the program, if the funding that the governor has proposed were the final decision the legislature makes this year, the program would go away. How many students were graduating a few years ago or going through these JTED programs just in the Pima County region?
In 2010, we were servicing, and again, these are students in every high school in the county, in what's called satellite programs, which they run in their local high schools. We oversee those programs, and that's where the money is generated that comes to the JTED that we turn around and give back to the districts for supplies, materials, really improving classrooms, those kinds of things. In 2010, we were serving 22,000 students in Pima County. Overnight, they snapped their fingers and took $29 million away from us and said, we're not going to fund ninth grade students any longer. That cut us from 22,000 students to 16,000 students overnight. That's a huge loss of students. It was a huge loss of money. It was $29 million cut statewide. 14 million of that 29 million was in Pima County. So looking at another $30 million cut, it will be virtually impossible for us to survive as a school district. It will be virtually impossible for career and technical education throughout the state, in the local high schools, as well as in the JTEDs, to survive. They will go away within 2 years.
And Mr. Westerbeek, what would that mean for your business if the program didn't exist?
The pool of people to employ would diminish tremendously. Which really what it's a shame to do is you have passionate people at a young age, and we live by one thing, pick from the tree, not the basket. Well, at JTED, you're actually growing the tree, and it's such a beautiful thing. So where they've done so many wonderful things, to see that, it'll tremendously affect our business in Tucson. We'll just have to develop different venue to get more interns and more cosmetologists in our company.
And so what are your options?
There really are no options. If they do cut the $30 million, it will defund us by probably in the first year, starting July 1 of 16, we will probably be losing about $6 to $7 million. Then as high schools cut their programs, which they will have to do, because they will be losing money at the rate of about $345 for every student in every career and technical education class, the districts will lose that money per student. They will have to end up cutting teachers, which means there are no more students in the program to generate the funding to come to the JTED to go back to the districts. It will be, I've referred to it as a death spiral, and it really is. As they cut teachers, they cut students, they cut the funds for the JTED, which cuts the funds to the districts. It will take us probably 2 school years to completely disappear.
New border technology may be a game changer in monitoring the Arizona-Mexico border.
It's called Integrated Fish Tower because it has different platforms. It has a day and night camera. It has a radar. What the radar does, it sweeps 24/7 this whole valley that we're looking at.
Now our Journalist Roundtable. Joining me in the studio today, my colleague Christopher Conover, Alexis Wicochea of the Arizona Daily Star, and Dylan Smith of the Tucson Sentinel. Thanks to each of you for coming in. Christopher, I want to start by acknowledging that we've only told one side of the story so far in the show. The other is the perspective of the governor, who says that any additional spending he adds to the budget in any programs, not just JTED or not just education, would add to the state's structural deficit. So bring us up to speed on what is the status of that deficit, what it means, and what this governor proposal would do.
The governor wants to, by the end of the budget year that we're talking about now, the next fiscal year, have the structural deficit at 0. And what that means is projected money coming in, tax revenue, fees, things like that, is equal to projected money going out, various expenses. Right now, they're a little bit out of balance with more money projected to go out than is projected to come in.
If there's no changes.
If there are no changes. But the operative word there is projected. When they put together the budget, be it the governor or the legislature, whoever is putting together the particular budget proposal, they're using projections, trying to guess how much money, and they're educated guesses, but how much money the state will have to work with. If you remember back a year ago, we were talking about a potential budget shortfall of $1 billion. Now we have a surplus. So the reality did not match, in a good way in this case, the projections.
And what does the governor's budget do with the deficit going forward? This proposed budget, I'm sorry.
The proposed budget going forward, he gets rid of that deficit by spending less money and on things like this JTED proposal that he has. It took $30 million, as we saw in the interview, from JTED. His new proposal is $10 million over 3 years with a business buy-in. So it's a smaller amount of money, and he says that's to keep those books balanced.
And as the AZPM Capitol reporter, you've been watching some murmurings, maybe more than that, at the Capitol about changing this proposal when the budget is finalized. What were you hearing this week?
It's more than a murmur at this point. 72 members of the legislature, bipartisan, both House and Senate, have come up with a proposal to restore the JTED funding that was cut last year. Now, what's interesting is one of the primary sponsors, really the big primary sponsor, is the chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee. Now, the Senate President, Andy Biggs, is not a fan of this plan, nor is the governor. Senator Shooter, the primary sponsor of this, has been in talks with both of them. The bill has not been scheduled for a hearing. It has not even received its first reading on the floor, which is literally where they just read the name of the bill and the number and then assign it to committees. None of that has happened at this point. But 72 is a veto-proof majority. So it really puts the governor and the Senate president a little bit in a corner if it doesn't get heard.
Dylan?
This isn't the first proposed cut to JTED. The program has already been cut. Would this measure put it back to the full funding it had a few years ago, or just a partial restoration of that?
It gives the money back that was taken last year that really goes into effect this coming school year, not the current one we're in. So it returns us to where we were at the beginning of last year's legislative
So
session.
not a complete restoration of what the program was before they had to start cutting the number of students they were serving.
Right, because there's been cuts for, we should say, a few
number of
years,
years,
not just this present year and next year.
Right.
Now, where would the legislature find that funding to add to JTED?
That is quite literally the $30 million or the $20 million question, because the governor's $10 million proposal. So there's a $20 million difference. The bill doesn't address that, and nobody has specifically addressed that. That's going to be one of those things that is going to have to be negotiated, and that's what's going on behind the scenes right now between Senator Shooter, the Senate President, and the governor, and everybody else who's involved. That's the negotiation that's going on. Okay, fine, you want to do this? What do you cut in its place?
Now, if the party leadership at the Capitol doesn't ever let that bill be heard, it doesn't matter that there's a veto-proof majority or support.
That's very true. However, with that many people, and there are some big, powerful names, the chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee is a powerful person in the Capitol. So there are ways that this can get worked in over time. And if you have 72 of 90 members who want to do something and leadership doesn't do it, there may be some problems down the road when leadership wants to do something later this year. Those 72 people can hold that idea hostage and say, we're more than happy to help you out. Where's our bill?
Now, along those lines, have we seen any momentum in changing any other parts of the governor's proposed budget, not just education?
Not really. We're very early in the process still. Now, last year, granted, we voted out the budget. I think it was about the 5th of March, which was very, very early. A lot of it was done behind closed doors, and that will still happen. You'll have a lot of back and forth between the governor's office and legislative leadership. So we're not hearing a lot yet. We're just starting hearings in the House and Senate Appropriations Committees, where the different agencies are coming and presenting their budget requests for the year. So we're just getting this rolling officially.
And then another part of the education budget, Alexis, is the governor's proposal to add about $106 million to K through 12 education. And I really want to make the point that that is different from the proposal that voters will look at in May. So tell us how they differ and what's happening in May.
That's right. What's coming before voters in May has nothing to do with JTED funding, funding for school facilities, or for achievement-related issues. It's not new money. This is money that has been owed to schools. It was withheld by the state during the recession. And so Essentially what the voters will be looking at is a settlement that those parties have come forward with. It's for a lesser amount than what schools are actually owed, but because some of that money will have to be drawn from the state land trust, it requires voter approval. So it's no new money, it's a past due bill that needs to be settled.
Now, the $106 million that the governor wants to add to the budget this year, if lawmakers approve it, happens either way. What happens with the May election that we're talking about is the result of a lawsuit. It's the settlement agreement to come up with that other funding that was promised to the schools that they didn't receive. If voters turn down that funding, what happens?
If voters say no to Proposition 123, the settlement will remain, and it'll be basically back to the drawing board. A resolution could be years out, and in the meantime, schools would not be receiving any relief.
That settlement is for considerably more money than what Prop 123 would give to schools.
That's right, and school districts at this point have been so starved for any financial assistance that they are willing to take what is being put forth right now rather than continue to wait and possibly receive even less than what's being offered right now.
And tell us a little bit about, part of the governor's budget proposal is to help schools that need roofs and infrastructure repairs. When you cover TUSD, do you hear about those concerns?
We do often hear about those concerns because the schools are decades old. Some were built in the 1950s, even earlier than that. And you have air conditioning going out at the beginning of the school year when it's extremely hot. So there are definitely needs there, and the thing about the Proposition 123 money is schools can really allocate that however they would like, although there are so many needs that it's really hard to point to one particular place where you would put that.
Now, you also reported this week on a bill that could affect the Tucson Unified School District's desegregation funding. What is that proposal?
It's Senate Bill 1125, and it basically looks to phase down the use of desegregation money. That's money that's been used by school districts to remedy discriminatory acts and discriminatory practices. Senator Debbie Lesko out of Peoria is putting this forward because she feels it's unfair that some school districts are receiving thousands of dollars more per student for that, and neighboring districts with similar demographics are not receiving that money. So she's looking to level the playing field, and she also says financially, and she also says that she wants to relieve taxpayers of that burden because the desegregation money is paid out by taxpayers, and also it comes from the state general fund as well. So this would look to phase out that money incrementally over a number of years, and this is the second time she's brought this forward. She brought this forward last session. She wasn't aware at the time that the Tucson Unified School District is still under an existing court order. So this revision of the bill basically shows it allows TUSD to be exempt from that until their court order is lifted, and then at that time they would need to start phasing out that money.
Dylan?
Are there any other districts in the state that are still under the court order? Because trying to get rid of TUSD's DSEG money, you kind of run into the problem of, well, a federal judge said you need to pay this, much like the Prop 123 issue, where a federal judge said you need to pay this money to districts.
Right. I believe Tucson Unified School District is the only one that's under an existing desegregation order. There are other districts where the court order has been lifted, but they do continue to receive money because they are required to make sure they continue programs and that they don't slide back into those discriminatory.
So they're still sort of under a plan that was laid out, much like TUSD's plan to relieve the past issues of segregation.
Right, and that's TUSD's concern, is that even when that court order is lifted, they will have a plan in place to prevent them from falling back into those old ways, and the plaintiffs in the case will be monitoring that to make sure that they're doing what they need to do, and if they are not, then the plaintiffs can go back to the court and ask that oversight be reinstated.
Okay, so just to make sure we're clear, the bill would affect funding for districts that are no longer under a court order, but may or may not still be executing a plan to maintain programs that are not discriminatory.
Right, so it doesn't apply to districts under existing court orders. It only applies for those out of the court order, and it comes into effect as soon as, I believe it's one fiscal year after court oversight is terminated.
Okay, so that And that's one of the
concerns. It seems like that would set up the likelihood of a whole bunch of litigation going on for these other districts that aren't like TUSD, where people would go back to court and say, hey, you can't end these programs.
That's what superintendents are arguing. That's their concern. And some do indeed reduce their spending, but it's on their own timeline and it's according to their needs. And this particular bill says you need to phase out, I believe, 7%, at least 7% each fiscal year for 10 years until it's all gone.
So it's not an immediate cut. It's sort of a
It's incremental. It's just they prescribe how much you need to cut rather than the school districts making that determination for themselves.
Right, and now we'll move on to higher education. There's a lot of education components in the budget and also in our governments. And so, Christopher, this week that was also discussed at, I think, one of the education committees. The state universities are sort of trying to push back a little bit against the cuts that they've seen, or the lack of restoration of those cuts. Tell us what's happening.
The universities, the Board of Regents and the universities individually are pushing back against the cuts they've seen the last few years because we do have a budget surplus this year, as we mentioned earlier. What the Board of Regents and the university presidents are under direction from the governor to come up with a new funding plan. So the president of the Board of Regents and the 3 university presidents went to the legislature, 2 committees, one in the House, one in the Senate this week, and laid out a new funding formula. Right now, funding formulas are very complex, to say the least, but in the simplest terms, the universities right now have a performance-based funding formula. It's a combination of things like number of students attending and how many degrees the universities give in a given year, and a lot of other factors, but that's the simple version. What they want is to get rid of that, and they want money to go, what they say, more directly towards core mission or classroom. Now that sounds familiar to people who listen to what the governor says, because he talks about putting more money in the classroom. What was interesting is when this was presented to the Senate Appropriations Committee, there was some argument back from senators. John Kavanaugh, who used to be the House Appropriations Chair, said, look, the average, according to the Board of Regents numbers, an in-state student pays for tuition is $6,500 a year. That's a great bargain. Why would we need to have them pay less than that if the state pays more? The state pays about 53% of the cost of going to school for an in-state student. That's not the tuition cost. Eileen Klein, the president of the Board of Regents, said actually in-state students are loss leaders at the universities. Combined what the state gives now and what they pay in tuition is still less than it costs to educate them. So they want more money coming in directly to the classrooms and not on a performance-based way. We'll see how this goes. It's something the governor's office seems interested in, somewhat behind, but it's got a long way to go still.
And University of Arizona President Ann Waverhart also was at the Capitol this week. What did she tell lawmakers?
She echoed President Klein's call. All 3 university presidents were there. It was kind of a traveling show. The ABOR president and the 3 university presidents were going from committee to committee with a presentation. And President Hart from the University of Arizona stated it very simply. This is our #1 priority this year in the legislature, is changing the way universities are funded.
And like everything else we've discussed at the table today, we're just going to have to see how it plays out, because lawmakers can make any number of changes to the governor's proposals and come up with new sources of revenue or cut back on his proposals. So we'll be watching.
Absolutely. It's still early in the system, or in the time, and there's a lot of negotiating that will still happen.
All right, and I want to ask Dylan for a quick summary in our last 40 seconds or so of what voter registration is looking like. We got an update this week about as we head into the presidential primary here.
Yeah, in Arizona, other is still the most popular choice. There are more what we call independents, non-party voters, than there are Republicans or Democrats. So that's going to create I think a bit of a kickback coming up with the presidential primary, what we actually call the presidential preference election in Arizona, because if you're not a registered party member, you won't be allowed to vote in March.
But you can, if you are not registered to a party, switch in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, you have until
February
22nd to, if you want to participate in the presidential primary in March, to pick a party, one of the 3 parties that have candidates on the ballot.
And then, of course, you can always switch back to being no party before our other elections. That's our show. Catch up with news throughout the week on our website, and we'll see you again in a week. Thanks for watching.